Good morning. Good morning. I'm Kimberly Bishop, Associate State Director at AARP Michigan, and I'd like to welcome you to Learn a Latte. I can't believe it's already the 7th of September, which means we're already a week into National Preparedness Month. And really, National Preparedness Month is a way to raise awareness about the importance of preparing for disasters and emergencies that can happen at any time. I'm sure that many of you were either impacted by Michigan storms last week or know someone who was. So this message is always timely. The theme for National Preparedness Month this year is a lasting legacy. And what that means is the life you've built is worth protecting. Prepare for disasters to create a lasting legacy for you and your family. So today, I'd like to introduce Kara Lorenz Goings. Kara's going to talk with us today about preparedness. She's been with the Region 2 Area Agency on Aging since 2014. She's a social worker and a certified geriatric care manager. Kara has worked with older and disabled adults since 2001. She's the assistant director at Region 2. She provides guidance and oversight for multiple programs and departments. Kara has been involved in emergency planning and delivery of services during an emergency for the population they serve. And she may tell us a little bit about a situation that they've had recently. Region 2's emergency plans are in place and they support the community in service delivery during a state of emergency. They offer the public the tools needed in circumstances such as the COVID-19 pandemic and other emergencies. So welcome, Kara, and thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Oh, thank you, Lily.
As I was doing a little bit of research to prepare for this session, I learned that there are kind of 4 different themes for the month. And I'd like to talk a little bit about each of them. So I'll start with saying what the 4 topics are, and we'll go from there. So first, it's build a kit with everyone in mind. 2 is to make a plan to prepare for disasters. 3 is protect your family and your property from disaster. And the last is teaching youth to prepare for disasters. So I have a few questions to ask, and I'd also like to invite our viewers to type their questions into the comments section for you to answer them live. Does that sound good, Kara?
Sounds great. Really happy to be here. Thank you.
We are so glad to have you here again. So the first one, build a kit with everyone in mind. What kind of things should people have in an emergency preparedness kit?
Yeah, so items that you could consider to have in your kit, they would really, you have to think about your basic needs or maybe even basic wants. And with that, I would say things that are important might be things like extra batteries, having support for medical equipment or backup devices. We're talking about taking care of older adults in the community or even children. They might have those types of things that you may need, having extra food and supplies on hand. Having a plan for an accessible evacuation could be part of your kit. So in case that disaster happens, unfortunately, sometimes it feels like disasters or emergencies are more common than not these days. Just having an accessible evacuation plan, having a backup plan for any supports that that are currently in place. Intergenerational family might need to think about caregivers that are providing care and if those people can help during those times, and then having contact information and means to contact supports during disasters would be important.
And I would like to remind our viewers that they are welcome to type questions in the comments section. You mentioned intergenerational families, and I'm thinking about when my mother was alive, one of the requirements that her caregiver had was that we had a kit. And it had to have, shelf-stable food and those kinds of things. But when we think about intergenerational families where we may have grandparents caring for grandchildren, or maybe they care for their grandkids after school or something. They may not live there all the time. Um, Even who should we consider as we're talking about building it with everyone in mind? And you mentioned caregivers, which is also important because whether they're paid givers or unpaid family caregivers, they're part of the family and they're part of the household.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of that is important, and thinking about kind of your circle and who's involved in it, and if certain people need their medications or their insulin, those types of things, and making sure those caregivers are, maybe they need to be helped too during the emergency,
Right.
even though they're providing care for somebody else. So just really thinking about your circle, who's in it, and what you can do to get through something like that. Planning ahead with that would be definitely part of the kit. And as you mentioned, like the food and the medication, of course, those are all things to include in your kit. If disaster happens, you want to have those things on hand if you can.
And I know, during the pandemic, I noticed, well, one of the things that has happened is more people adopted pets. And I've seen more people talk about emotional support animals. So I can imagine that someone who has a service animal thinks about that already. But what provisions should we make for pets? And I'm mentioning dogs, but dogs, cats, birds, rabbits, whatever pets you may have in your home.
Absolutely. I would say, just like humans, we should prepare for sure to have some extra food and water on hands for our pets. Also, considerations you might want to check with, like the local humane society. I know sometimes they have different foster pet programs when an emergency strikes, in case you can't take your pet with you for some reason, or having a backup plan. Could a loved one, family member, a caregiver help with your pet during that time? And just making sure you have what you need for your pet at the time, if you can. And again, an evacuation plan. I mean, of course, we have to protect ourselves, but a priority might be, how would you get your pet out of the emergency as well, or keep your pet safe during some sort of weather disaster, that sort of thing.
Okay. And I see a question from Christine. She wants to know if we'll be sharing a list of items recommended for our kit. We will be sure to post that in the comments so that you can just go back and check the link there. So yes, Christine will be doing that. Thank you for asking. So number two is making a plan to prepare for disasters. What does that mean, and how can you ever plan for a disaster?
So planning ahead is key. Again, you can't predict when something like this is going to happen, but any plan that you could put in place prior to something happening is really key. So it could include, but it wouldn't be limited to, developing a personal emergency plan, which would be, what do I need in this case of an emergency? Learning how to stay healthy and informed in advance, gathering paperwork and contacts, which we'll talk a little bit more about, is very important. As we serve at the Area Agency on Aging, we serve older adults and adults with disabilities. We really believe in assisting someone with their plan is important. We help folks get the assistance needed to help maintain independence during an emergency, if that's possible. So we kind of develop a plan with folks that we're engaged with in the community to make sure they have some sort of backup plan in a scenario like that. So having it in writing is a good thing if you can.
Absolutely. We have a question from Brenda. Brenda wants to know if the utility company will provide a generator in case of an emergency if a patient is in the house. And I'll take this one. And first, I would say to contact your utility company so you'll know for sure, because there's no way to know whether there's a standard answer. But many years ago, I did work for a utility and they did not provide generators. But one of the things that they did do was ask that their customers let them know if they had someone who was on life sustaining equipment that required electricity so that account could be flagged and prioritized. So um, I'm going to say no, I don't think that they're going to provide the generator. I would contact them just in case, but that really is a good question about making a plan. And Regina has a great comment or suggestion that you could have information already together in a fanny pack. I'm assuming so that you could just kind of grab and go if you needed to.
That would be good.
So we've one of the things that was new this year talked about protecting your family and your property from disaster. How would we go about protecting not only our family but our property from disaster as well?
Right. So when a disaster happens, the immediate concern is the safety of for yourself and those you care about. Once that immediate danger passes, really having your financial and medical records is important. For the contact information could be crucial to help you start the recovery process. So that's very important. So taking time now to safeguard the critical documents would be very important. You can ensure you have access to essential medical and prescription information, and it can help you avoid additional stress during that time, right? So, in addition to taking the time now to think about those items you would want to protect from damage, you could take with you if you had to suddenly evacuate your home. The first step is to kind of take an inventory of those documents and the contents and the valuables. So I was just going to read off some things that are kind of very important to think about during that, which might be some vital records like your birth and marriage certificates, your IDs, so your passport, your driver's license, your social security card, if you have a military service ID, anything like that. If you have pet ownership papers, mortgages, lease, or property deeds, vehicle registrations or loan documents, insurance policies, estate planning documents, contact information for your medical professionals. That's very important. I know some older adults or people in general have kind of like a little file of life on their refrigerator in a folder which has some of that key information. So something like that. Priceless personal mementos like family photos, keepsakes. Thankfully, nowadays, a lot of people have some of that electronically. So hopefully you have that device with you if something happens. Any possessions with any monetary value like jewelry, art, or collectibles. Of course, it's we have to think about these things and how many of these things we can keep safe during this time, but you need to keep yourself safe also. So once you've gathered that information, but you can kind of go through this before something is to happen, so then you'd be prepared. So you could consider storing those papers or copies of those papers in a fireproof or a waterproof box. I know here in my household I have a small fireproof box that I keep some of these things in. You could have a safe deposit box, which that would be a great thing, or have a trusted friend or relative keep some of the things that we're talking about. Also, storing electronic copies would be really important. If you have the means to do that, putting them on a removable flash drive or an external hard drive, and thinking about where you might store the belongings. If you have valuable items, like in your basement per se, if you have a basement, you might want to move them to a higher location if it's a water issue or that sort of thing. So that's a big answer to that question, but that's kind of a way you could plan for those important documents and valuables ahead of time.
That's a lot. And, I think one of the resources that AARP has for family caregivers, it's called Prepare to Care. And there is an electronic version as well. But it really does give you a place to keep a lot of the information that you mentioned. So we'll have to put a link to our Prepare to Care document. I hadn't really thought about that in terms of disaster preparedness,
Mhm.
but certainly emergency preparedness. If you have a loved one, knowing where all that information is right away will definitely help.
Right. It reminds me of you mentioned we had a local happening lately. that was an emergency, and it had to do with a residential setting where folks had to evacuate right away because of some structural issues. But there was like 175 people there, and it reminds me they had to get out in like roughly 1 to 3 hours. So having some of these things in place, like if your loved ones have some of the papers or some caregivers, or you have it all in one spot, because if you have to leave that quickly, you kind of want to have it all in one spot. It wasn't even weather related per se, so it might have just having it in one location to take it out, or have someone be able to go back and grab it for you. That sort of thing is important.
And Marianne asked if there's a link to the AARP site to this inventory list as well so that it can be printed. Marianne, I'm not sure, but we will check and we'll definitely give you a link. I know that there's a link for Prepare to Care that should be printable. So at least that will help. So we will check on that and get that in the comments section. So Kara, this, the kind of the preparation and thought about this. I mean, of course, you think about in Michigan, we get heavy rain and it knocks down trees, which knocks out power. We get ice storms, which knocks down trees and knocks out power. But this really is about being prepared or trying to be as prepared as you can for anything in advance. And I was just thinking about even traveling. If I lost my wallet, that would feel like a disaster at the time. So even maybe something like, taking a picture of my ID in case, my wallet was stolen or something like that. So if I was traveling, on an airplane, at least I could get home. Even things like that, just making sure that there's always a plan or a backup plan to know what we're doing. One of the things that I also noticed, because this year really seems to focus on the entire family and not just the people that are important to you, but also the things that are important to you. So the fourth recommendation is teaching youth to prepare for disaster. So I can remember having fire drills in school, and I never had one at home, and we probably should have, as you've talked about, an evacuation plan. But how do we talk to children about preparing for emergencies without scaring them?
Yeah. So I've done a little even personal research. I have 6 kids in my own home,
Wow.
so I know a little bit about this, but I would say it is really key to talk to kids or children about instances before they happen. And that goes along with being calm when you're talking about the different things that can happen. So it all kind of comes back to planning. As you said, we can't plan for what's going to happen, but we could at least talk to children about what may happen. And you mentioned like fire drills in school. There are things you can plan for that way. You should have a plan for specific scenarios and communicate the plan. So things you could think of that might happen, having a plan for those. And again, staying calm is a key factor in any emergency, but especially with children. And like I said, I'm a bit of an expert of sorts with the kids. So planning on how to navigate and staying calm during an emergency is key, I would say.
So, Kara, do you have any thoughts on it? And I'm just thinking about this, like the stickers that go on windows, so that if, for example, firefighters had to come to your home, that they would know that there were children that slept in this particular room that you could put on windows. Have you seen those, or I don't know? Do you think anything like that would be helpful?
That definitely something like that could be helpful, indicating where somebody needs help. I haven't seen as many of those in recent years. I think I used to see those more. I don't know exactly the reasons why, but I would be interested to find out more if that's still available. Just to say, every once in a while you'll see signs if someone has a hearing deficit or something close to a home. I think that sort of stuff would be really important if that could be identified during an emergency. And then just in general too, if that could be identified some way, but still in a safe manner, I think that would be a good thing for planning.
And it's, again, I start to think about a number of things that um, I wouldn't necessarily associate with emergency preparedness or a natural disaster. But a few years ago, we had our house painted and we took the house numbers off. And we got new house numbers and didn't put them back on right away. We got a letter from our township telling us that they were going to fine us if we didn't get the house numbers back up, because that's the emergency personnel needs to know where to look.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you just don't think of everything. So just going through and trying to plan the best we can. But that does make sense that they would need the numbers to know where to go.
So are there other things? I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, and we kind of went through a lot of things quickly, but are there other tips that you have for people as they are planning to protect their legacy? So not just the legacy of the people, but of the things. Because I have a memento that's really important to me. I have my grandmother's wedding ring, right? And it doesn't have a lot of monetary value, but it has a lot of sentimental value. And now it's making me think about what are the things that I just absolutely would really want to be able to get to quickly, to take with me if there was an emergency, or if I knew that I needed to leave, as you talked about, having to evacuate a number of older adults, older and disabled adults, because of an issue with the foundation of where they were living. So I just am really thinking about disaster preparedness or emergency preparedness, or just preparedness in general, a little differently than I have in previous years, when they put it through the lens of protecting your legacy, or a lasting legacy, and the life that you've built is worth protecting. It really puts a different spin on things, and makes me think about different things that I might want to protect or prepare and make allowances for.
Yes, I agree. I mean, as far as you mentioning your grandma's wedding ring or things like that, the best plan that I think of is just having that in that secure location. I have things like that in that waterproof container, but I also know on hand where most of my important papers are. I think if I had an opportunity, I could just grab those. And then I think about that local emergency that I mentioned with the evacuation. If you can connect with a community organization like the Area Agency on Aging, or if you're already involved with some sort of organization like that pre-emergency, people like that are on people are on hand to help anyway. But if you're already kind of working with someone, it is good to do that beforehand. If you can call some places ahead of time to see if they can get in your life prior to a crisis, so then they can help you too, because it is a lot to navigate through when it happens. And sometimes it's not just an immediate need, it's ongoing long term. You have to find housing and different things like that. So that's a really good tip too, I would say, to not forget about.
When I think about the Red Cross, they're always deployed right off the bat during disasters and emergencies. They would probably also be a good resource for information on being prepared as well, because they spring into action so quickly. And I think just even not just having the plan for you and the people in your home, but if you have older loved ones, or it could be younger loved ones, it could be anybody, but just making sure that you have a plan. If they need some assistance, that you have a plan for them, and know those doctors, and have access to the information that you need. And I can recall back during a time where you had to scan documents, and everybody didn't necessarily have a scanner, but now just about everyone has a smartphone or access to one. And that's also a great way to take pictures of documents and email them to yourself.
Right.
Because even if physical documents are destroyed, because you may not have that waterproof or fireproof box, if you have pictures of the documents, of those policies, of, all those important things, at least you can get to them in the interim, regardless of what's going on.
Yes.
Okay, Kara, we have gone through a lot, but any final thoughts before we close, or any final questions from our viewers?
No, I just want everybody to think about, like you said, others, but also your circle, your legacy, and really what that would mean to plan for.
Okay, thank you so much for being with us, Kara. As we wind to a close, I'd like to remind our viewers to visit our webpage at aarp.org/Michigan to see our upcoming events, some in person, and we're continuing to do some virtually as well. We hope that you've heard some good information today, heard something a little bit new. We will follow up with additional resources so that you can click those links to get the information related to inventory list. And we hope that everyone has a fantastic day today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.